Cool. So, I mean, your expertise and what the kind of heart of this podcast is all about pricing.
Right.
Specifically for software and SaaS companies, what's kind of the number one mistake, or what do you see go wrong about pricing? And can you share some of the best strategies you've seen from, pricing being in the Valley?
Yeah. So what tends to happen in Valley companies is either a company starts at an enterprise scale and sales makes up the pricing as they go. And it's bound to happen. There is nothing wrong about it. That's how things evolve. Or your startup is more of an SMB startup, with a lower price point, and you're selling it for like $10 a month, $9 a month, and so on. And as your company grows, either you go from being an enterprise company to more also having a mid-market segment, or if you are an SMB company, then you'll start to go upstream a little bit. And what you want is a more consistent way in which to capture revenue and value from the market. And that's where pricing packaging becomes important, because if you are doing it how you started as a company, then you become suboptimal. Because if you grow and you have, let's say, 100 customers, then some customers are going to be big customers. Some, just to make it simple, some are big, some are small. The big customers have different needs. They may use different use cases. The smaller customers may use, your most high velocity packages. So then pricing and packaging for a SaaS company typically is about how do we automate and create these structures such that we can, when we go to market, we are clear about our communication as to what offerings and packages are good for which segments, such that we are able to maximize our value in kind of this demand curve. That's really what the evolution is. And the mistakes tend to be when companies grow, they don't evolve fast enough. So on one direction, there are companies who just have like this traditional good, better, best model, but they actually have an enterprise motion and they leave money on the table. So that's one way they leave money on the table. The other way is if they are bigger and they have like this, just, every deal is just going to be custom scoped. That creates a lot of overhead, and that also inhibits scaling, because your deal lengths keep getting longer. You're not sure about what is your consistent price points, and you're just reinventing the wheel every time when you're doing pricing, right? And that is also confusing for customers and creates a lot of overhead. So in both ways, companies then end up leaving money on the table if they don't evolve their pricing fast enough.
And when you mean evolving pricing, are you talking about increasing, or are you just kind of adjusting and pivoting based on kind of what your conversion rate is?
Yeah, it's mostly like the price point is almost the last part of this whole equation. The biggest problems are do we have the right packages for the right type of customers? And then within the right packages, do we set the right pricing variable, right? Is it a per seat pricing? Is it a per account, per email, send, contact, whatever, depending on your product, whatever the pricing variable is, have you set that correctly? And have you aligned it to customer value? So packages and variables that you use to charge for your product are the most important things to scale pricing, basically. And once you scale it properly, that's where you get the bang for the buck.
Makes sense. So obviously, the SaaS model is becoming more popular, both from an SMB perspective and then also enterprise. It's growing at a fast rate, and pricing models are kind of maybe outdating as well. How do you kind of recommend SaaS founders to think logically and systematically about their pricing model when they're looking to build that out?
Yeah, well, I kind of take a sequential approach in going through pricing, right? So first of all, is like you identifying there is a need to solve the problem, right? So that will show up in your metrics. That will show up in either longer sales cycles. That may show up in ASPs that are not increasing. That may also show up in shelfware. If you have products that you sell, but people are not using parts of those products, so it will start to show up in your, you can't upsell them again. So at some point it will, your account, you have to look at how are your accounts growing in time? Is the product adoption good enough? Right, and most likely an under optimized pricing model will lead to challenges there. So now, once you've identified there is a problem, and that is a natural phenomena, you will identify once you start looking at your numbers that okay, there's a problem. The way to solve it, like I like to solve it sequentially. So I start, there are 4 or 5 main decisions that you have to make. And I would say review these in order, right? First is review your packaging. Are you really creating offers and packages for the market that are very specific to use cases and customer segments, such that you have the enterprise plan, it really solves the need for enterprise customers and scales appropriate to their needs. Then you have the SMB offerings. Are they customized enough to their needs, right? So look at the packages. There is a whole set of literature that you can read to better understand it. I'm including some of that in my book as well. And then when you figure out you have the main structures, right? Then you figure out your key pricing variable. So there are a couple of approaches. You can price based on capability. You can say, hey, this is a product we charge $20,000 or $200,000, depending on what the product is. And there is consumption based pricing, right? So if you're Twilio, you say per SMS cost are X, or if you're AWS, you say per GB storage or compute power, this is how much we use. Or it's like a CRM software, say this is how much my product is per seat. So pricing variable is really important, because if the customer looks at the variable, appreciates it, intuitively understands it, then it will be a well-aligned pricing model that you can get enough revenue back. And there's also some interesting things you can think about to actually maximize the value of the pricing that you get from customers. So that's a high leverage decision, packaging and pricing variable. And then is the structure. So even after you have the pricing variable, you can say, well, it's pay for what you use. That's one option, right? Young companies say that. So as a prospect, you will be like, well, it's great, I will pay for what I use. If I don't use it, I won't pay. As your business grows, you want more predictable revenue, and that starts to be less helpful. Then you want to have some part of the structure that is a platform fee as well as a transactional fee, so that you have more predictability in your revenue. So there are different pricing structures: single part tariff, 2-part tariff, 3-part tariff, and so on. So these 3 decisions actually account for major leverage points in the pricing structure. If these are good, then you really are optimizing for it globally. And then locally optimizing for pricing is lastly the price point. What is the per seat price or the per API call price, for example? So that you can, that can be more discovered, and it has to do with your competition. It has to do with how much discounting your customers want, and a bunch of other variables. So that's that final decision. But that's what I would say, is to go through it in this order, because if you sequentially solve it, then you're ensuring that you're solving it from a top down rather than a local maxima. Because if you just look at the price point, it's always constrained by the overall structure of your model. And if your structure isn't really well designed, then your price point variable, if you change it a little bit, it's not going to give you the biggest bang for the buck.
And then when founders are thinking, you have two sides, right? One are saying, okay, this is our price point, we're going to stick to our roadmap. And then you have other founders who are maybe looking to kind of optimize their maximum, revenue and LTV, which is kind of what we talked about at the beginning of this episode. How would you suggest to them to effectively adjust, maybe increase their pricing, and what are they basing that key points or metrics upon, and how often should we be looking at this?
I mean, in general, a complete pricing revamp is often not done. I would expect it to not be more often than every 2 years, but with some amount of optimization every quarter.
Okay.
So that's the frequency in which they should do it. Now, let me ask you to repeat your first part of the question, please.
Yeah. So if they're looking to, I guess, maximize their LTV or versus compared to sticking to a price and sticking to the roadmap, how do you adjust and increase their pricing? And then what are they basing that on? What key points or metrics are they making that decision?
So the LTV really is, LTV is the lifetime value of the customer, right? So the lifetime value is going to be optimized if, one, customers think they're paying the appropriate amount for your product, and 2, they are actually using the product for a long term, right? So coming up with the right structure will ensure that if the packages are well designed, then they will be well designed both for your first land, like what are the initial MVP the customer want and the expansion motion in a SaaS offering. If you give the customer all of your features in one go, they may not be able to use it. So it will be shelfware for a while. And then they will say, well, I have this plan, which is this high end plan, and I'm not using 10 things. I want to then churn or downgrade to a lower plan. Or they may start looking around, right? That happens quite often, right? So that's something you don't want. You want them to have the right plan for them that's well aligned to the value that they're getting to maximize their LTV, right? So the structure solves a lot of that. The other point to price point is an interesting phenomena that in some cases, pricing too low reduces demand for software products. So I follow this, VC called Tom Tungas, and his blog is like a wealth of information on pricing and many other aspects on SaaS. One of the points he notes is that pricing acts a little bit like a Veblen good, where if you reduce price, then the demand starts to go down, and the perceived value of the product can actually be much higher if the price is higher. So specifically, let's say you have an enterprise product and you price it really low, even in total, many enterprise companies may just distrust your price if it is too low, right? So let's say you're a down market competitor, you're trying to go after an SAP or an Oracle, and you charge, you are 100x cheaper than them. Fortune 500 companies will not take you seriously, right? They will understand that, intuitively they will get you probably don't have enterprise capabilities or support and all of that. So if you have the right offering, you are doing yourself a disservice by reducing price, because you may think that you'll get more market share, but you'll get less market share depending on the segment.